Happy Wednesday afternoon. Welcome to Manufacturing Hub. Super excited to go into the month of April. We want to thank the folks at Talon for sponsoring our ERP theme last month. We had many hours of ERP conversation. This month, we're going to change it up a little bit. I have tentatively pitched this theme to Vlad as Faces You Should Know. Vlad says he hates the theme. He hates the theme name, loves the idea, has not come back at me with an alternate name. So we are tentatively Faces You Should Know in Manufacturing as this theme. Eventually it will get updated probably around episode 4, the end of this theme. Having said that, if you guys are new here, welcome. If you have been here before, welcome back. If you guys are new here or you followed Ryan in, thank you guys so much for coming. We like to go have fun, right? We've got Ryan on. Vlad and I are going to go chat with him for the next 75 or so minutes. We're going to talk all about manufacturing. We're going to talk about Ryan's background and some topics that we have. But if during any of that you guys have questions for Ryan, questions for Vlad or myself, or just in general, please feel free to go ahead and throw them in the chat. Most of the time we have a super active chat. Sometimes you guys have questions for us. Sometimes you're letting us know where you are or what you're doing, or that you've come and are really enjoying listening to Ryan, our guest. So if you guys have thoughts or questions, please feel free to go ahead and drop those in the chat. We will do our very best to go ahead and get to them over the course of that. Having said all that, everyone, I want to officially welcome you to Manufacturing Hub. My name is Dave. This guy above me, if you guys are watching live, is Vlad. This is episode 206 of Manufacturing Hub. Again, the tentative to be determined, will almost certainly rename at some point theme is Faces You Should Know in Manufacturing. Having said all of those things, we want to welcome our guest Ryan onto the show. Ryan, thank you so much for being here. Welcome back.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. And 206, I think that's the number of bones in your body, isn't it?
Oh, that is a good trivia question.
There you go.
Probably, maybe it's a question for the audience, right? How many bones are there in your body, and is that number 206? But Ryan,
Wow.
that being, do want to welcome you to the show. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with Dave and I today. Before we dive into the manufacturing, I want to say, or meat on the bones of the conversation, can you tell us a little bit more about your background? How did you get into manufacturing, industrial automation, and ultimately walk us through your career and tell us what you are doing today?
Oh boy, that's a big loaded question. So I'm Ryan Cahalane. I'm managing partner at Axiom Manufacturing Systems. I've been in manufacturing pretty much my whole career. How I got into this, I guess I was born into it. My dad was a engineering manager at Goodyear. We did a lot of international assignments. I got to grow up in some interesting places. You probably see a bunch of stuff in the background from the Congo, Zaire at the time, Morocco, France. Spent some time in Canada. I got a electrical engineering degree at Purdue University, and then I went to work at Goodyear as well, controls engineer by training. Did corporate engineering, did plant engineering, and then have stayed in the technology and manufacturing domain pretty much my whole career since then. Somewhere along the way, I took a right turn at Albuquerque. I thought, I'm seeing a lot of weird decisions that don't make a lot of sense. There's things that we want to do in a plant that we think could make a real difference, and management for whatever reason is telling us do something completely different. And at the time, things have been going pretty well in the stock market. This is back during the internet bubble the first time around, and I decided to take a break. Went off, traded a bunch of stocks. Found out I wasn't very good at that, especially when the market went down. Everyone looks like a genius on the way up. And I had met my wife, and or future wife at the time. She is also in manufacturing, and some of you may have seen her face on LinkedIn and otherwise, Catherine. Um, Tried to figure out, which way do I want to go? Would I like to learn more about high tech and some of these really cool things that I was seeing starting to take shape, that were fundamentally changing the landscape we were in, or do I want to go into the consulting world and understand some of why was this silliness that I had seen at various points in my career seeming to creep in, and I decided I'd go that way. And I spent some time with Deloitte Consulting. Got to understand that the decisions that are made on the business side of things don't always align with what seems to make sense in your narrow field of view. Worked with some really incredible people there. We had the 9/11 happened right midway through that piece of my career. I decided it was not going to be overly easy to spend or to, I was living in Canada, in Windsor, Ontario, traveling across the border to Detroit, to where all our customers were at, and decided to change lanes, went back into technology, spent some time with Brock Solutions. And then there was a startup that we were working with, Active Plant, and they were looking for someone to lead their services organization, and they lured me over to the dark side, and I got to see really the start of what now has become so much bigger in terms of manufacturing software. From there, I spent time with General Electric and helped run their data management and visualization business, prophecy historian, all of that stuff. Then got a call from the people at Rockwell, and they were looking to transition from a hardware company into a software company, or at least understand how to do modern software. So went over to help lead the software business at Rockwell, and we did some pretty amazing things. Both those experiences, well, all of these experiences are just, for me, that's been a true joy, getting to work with and be at the heart of so much change in the world of manufacturing. Left Rockwell, and I was going to live out the dream I've always had, which was to move west, be in the mountains, and joined OSI, which again was at the center of a lot of fundamental transformation. My mother or my mother-in-law was sick at the time, and my wife said, "No way, I'm moving west. Come back this way." I helped lead digital transformation, digital growth at a company called Colfax for a few years, and then I had a personal incident, a stroke, that took me, just I was doing the corporate climb and realized that, what, I probably am not cut out to do the Fortune 500 executive thing in my current condition, and so started doing independent consulting. During my recovery, went to a company called FZ, Fines Alstra, and led their team. There was a systems integration team. And when we got that business sold off to a larger global entity, we decided, let's start Axiom and do it for ourselves. And so here I am.
Ryan,
So
I've got
I guess
yeah,
I
go
was
ahead.
going to say, I've gotten it's been a privilege to see the space from a lot of different dimensions as a manufacturer and someone who has seen the operations, understood the operations, helped sustain the operations as in both corporate and plant. I've gotten to be a support mechanism as a consultant and a systems integrator. And I've gotten to be a technology provider and chart the course in a lot of what's to come, or what was to come and is now here in manufacturing. And so that's, if there's anything kind of special, is I just have seen it from a lot of different angles, and that mostly tells me I don't know a whole lot of anything, but I know a whole lot of people, and I can appreciate and understand the problems that people are going through, and try to connect them to answers. And sometimes those answers I can help with.
Let me ask you a question on the whole angle side, right? Because I think it is extremely important in our industry. For better or for worse, you can, as you said, work at a plant. You can also work for a systems integrator. You can work for a consulting firm, right? There's a lot of different facets, and I would say they all have their own maybe particular challenges and opportunities. I was actually in a recent conversation where this was brought up as a lot of engineers have a hard time going from a plant floor environment into, let's say, a more customer facing consulting or integration type of a role. So I was curious on your side if that switch was deliberate, and maybe some retrospective in how you made that happen, or maybe some of the thoughts looking back on maybe how to make it easier for certain individuals as well.
Oh boy.
Mhm.
Yeah, it was definitely a switch, especially going from really technical, I mean, what we do from a engineering, controls engineering, keeping an operation running, um, and the kind of constant adrenaline, I guess, of that environment, because it never stops. There's always a problem to wrestle with. And as an engineer, that's just fun. Into the world of consulting, in Deloitte, and again, super high adrenaline, super, an amazing amount of talent that you're surrounded by. But for me personally, it was a shock. Like, first of all, the problems are not something you can clearly identify often, and often you're trying to understand what the customer is saying, but then really scratch under the hood and understand the why, and understand some of the dynamics that are at play. That it isn't as straightforward as it's just a production line. There's a system that's working, and eventually you can kind of troubleshoot and figure out. But I think the bigger thing for me was, they're just fancy people. Like, they're you know they got their act together. They all went to fancy schools, and are excellent at speaking on stage, and excellent at, and brilliant people that, in terms of, you're surrounded by people that generally, at least at first, made me feel like I was completely inadequate. And what I later found was the one thing I had that most of them didn't have, which was I had been there. I knew what plants were all about. I knew what operations needed. I knew what was, were some of the challenges or the nuances. And all those fancy words, in the end, without someone like me keeping them honest, or helping to bring validity to the customer, or helping expose stuff that you just couldn't understand or couldn't quite see from that lens. Um, it was a skill set or experience base that was needed and was valued. And I would, I think my biggest thing was I was terrified. I was absolutely terrified. 24/7 terrified. Um, I felt like people are going to see through this and realize I don't know what I'm talking about. Like, I'm not a business guy. I've never run a P&L. I don't know. Um, and I would say, from an advice standpoint, I would say, just you got to accept that you understand a lot more than you think you do, and you got to dive in, and you realize that you'll figure it out. It's just like going through engineering school. Like you're over your head. Every class you take a test in, at least at Purdue, like in the first couple of years, like you were guaranteed to get a C or a D or worse. And then they curved you all back up to somewhere normal. But you're it was breaking you down and rebuilding you. And in a lot of ways, you just have to embrace that, understand that everything is every situation is a learning opportunity, and fundamentally you have a set of experiences that are valuable, and it's understanding the context and the lens and bringing that lens that you look at the world with as a way to add value to others. So
I really appreciate how you broke that down. Like I said, I've talked to many engineers who are certainly afraid for the reasons that you've described to make that move, right? Because there is, I want to say, not necessarily an illusion, but there is some elitism, right? Like there's people who you look up to and you feel that you're just not going to be able to meet or deliver the kind of work that they're delivering. So I think a lot of
mhm.
engineers just never try, right? They just stay in their roles and never make that transition. But I really appreciate how you broke it down. I hope some of the listeners have taken away at least a few learning points in what you've said. Let us, transition to real problems in manufacturing, right? And so again, even on that side, depending on whom I talk to, and obviously you need to appreciate the fact that there's different stakeholders in every organization. They're going to tell you there's either problems on the people side, right? Whether that's upskilling or hiring, or there's problems on the technical side, right? There's not enough control systems, not enough data, not enough ways to make decisions, or there's problems, maybe the way I break it down, at least on the process side, right? We need to modernize, we need to upgrade, we need better things and widgets and gadgets or better business processes. So I'm curious, Ryan, if I were to ask you in a very broad sense, what kind of problems and challenges that are maybe tangible you see in manufacturing today?
I think I would say the only universal truth is that universally they're all different. And um, we were talking a little while back about, kind of where are we winning, where are we not winning, which opportunities are, what's a similar pattern so that we might uh, use that to help drive the business. And for the most part, there is no pattern. I can't say that it's one particular industry. I can't say there's one particular problem set. You mentioned a bunch of very, very relevant issues that manufacturers are facing today. Um, I would, in general, uh, when we walk into a customer, I, I liken it a bit to being in a boxing ring with where you're in a different weight class, or you're outmatched by your opponent. And at least in North American US manufacturing, um, in a lot of cases, the customers that we run into are they're pretty beaten up. Manufacturing hasn't been a sexy space to be in. People in it are weathered. They're scarred. They've
Mm,
toughed through a lot of things. The and especially the last few years, they've gone through COVID. They've gone through the supply chain thing. They've smack in the middle of the silver tsunami or gray tsunami or whatever they call it. Um, their supply chain and some of the stuff that's going on in the economy and politics right now is forcing, again, it's just body blow after body blow. And and definitely the latest the change in administration, and whichever side you happen to be on, it's just brought real fundamental change. And that's the uppercut that no one wanted, and we're still having to deal with. At the same time, I would say that there's an optimism that I I think is a little bit different now than I've seen in the past. The the space, the potential in manufacturing is so much more right now. People realize the importance in a way that I don't think, in the past you outsource that, like send that to some other
Yep.
place. Um, that doesn't mean that I'm seeing it all come back yet, or that, it's manna from heaven, everyone's doing great. Like, no, that's not the case. They're beat up, bruised, battered, but the, it's almost like they've seen the enemy's wearing out, and it's our turn. and it and and you mentioned people, process, technology. I think all of those dimensions, there's been so much change, but technology in particular it has advanced in a way that you can solve problems that you couldn't solve before, or you can do things that are were out of reach. Okay, if you were Ford or Coke or Procter and Gamble, you had all kinds of resources, you had all kinds of access, and you could make changes and you could optimize performance. You had access to knowledge that you just couldn't get if you weren't that type of company. And I think the changing dynamic in terms of the knowledge base and the supply of knowledge and the supply of technology is has really democratized things. And that's allowing companies to move that much faster. And for me, we serve a lot of mid-market customers, smaller customers, by choice. Now, we have large customers and we love them too, um, but I think the smaller companies can be that much more nimble. They can make decisions that much quicker. They can adopt technologies that are fundamentally going to transform their business. And um, and even some of the traditional barriers, like my network infrastructure isn't in place. I'm not ready. I don't have an engineer on staff. Whatever it might be. A lot of those um, there's answers to now. And so I think the level of optimism in the industry and in the people that serve the industry is really special. And I think this time that we're in right now is I've never seen anything like it in 30 years. Certainly, it's not like when I graduated and we had walls full of ding letters, you know, places no one wanted you, even if you had a degree from Purdue. um, Today, being an engineer, being a technician, being someone who's interested in manufacturing, being, whatever your background,
Hmm.
there is tremendous opportunity in the space. And I think coming back to the challenges, I I think the challenges are all over. One day it's going to be my quality's off. The next day it's, I can't find the workforce I need. The third day it's going to be, I have inventory problems. The fourth day, it won't stand still. And that's also part of the fun of this environment. Now, I think the trick for for senior leaders, for operations team, for people like us who serve that industry, is helping drive focus.
Hmm.
It's also tremendously easy these days to get distracted. Like there's squirrels and bright shiny objects everywhere, and fundamentally, how am I going to make a difference in my operation right now? And how am I going to make it in a way that's also lasting? And it's not just going to be a flash, and then all of a sudden I'm going to create a problem downstream for myself because I don't have the right support structure. So, very long-winded way of answering. I know it isn't specifically here's the problem, but I think the there is an abundance of problems and there's also an abundance of solutions, and it's really helping figure out what's the most important to make the difference, and then working together to figure it out.
Hmm. I like what you're saying. I absolutely agree that there is positivity and hope, right? Especially in the mid market. as to where the opportunities lie, Ryan. I guess I look at it slightly different. So I want to slightly push back on the answer of the only common denominator is there is no common denominator. And so let me tell you what I'm seeing, and then we can go from there. So like especially the small to mid market groups, the ones who were even 5 years generally uninterested because of money, because of engineering, because of networks, right? I kind of look at those guys in three buckets, right? We've got the people who have been making the same boxes on the same machines for the last 120 years. There is no technology. There is the operator who knows how to do it and are going to, if they are able to, make the same boxes on the same machines for the next 120 years. And maybe we'll go talk to those guys in 10 years or 5 years or 2 years when they actually realize they need help. And I see some on the exact opposite side of we've gone through the process, we're collecting data, we can make data driven decisions, maybe we're looking at more automation or robotics, or we know what our problems are. I see kind of like a major swath in the middle of people who most of this technology was unobtainium just a few years ago due to people, resources, networking, money, all of those. And the reason why we're chasing a different problem every day or every week is because we don't have the ability, we don't have the data or information, be it from our control systems or from our financials or from our supply chain. We don't have actual good known data to go through the process of making those decisions. So the common denominator that I generally see for a lot of that middle group is not necessarily a product of I can't go sell you this box to go solve your problem, or I can't go sell you 40 hours of consulting to go solve this problem. It's the we need to go pull some of this raw data in so that we can go make legitimate decisions. Are you saying that are you seeing similar things and it's just we're pulled in so many directions it's hard to get a commitment to we're going to go do this 3 month engagement or we're going to go do this 6 month engagement to actually get that valid data because everyone is chasing a different squirrel every hour or every week?
Um, you said a word that I think is really important, which is commitment.
Mhm.
And I maybe I need to take back that there isn't a universe or
Well,
that
I think we're seeing similar things. I think I would
yeah,
just define it slightly different than you, and that's why I
yeah.
wanted to ask.
Well, I think the universal problem I am seeing is level of commitment, level
Hmm.
of willingness to move or just awareness that you can make change. Uh,
Hmm.
I would also say that the decision cycle is accelerating, and that
Hmm.
doesn't mean that the spend or doing new projects or whatever. I mean, there's all sorts of reasons where people
Yep.
are staying still and just making the bucks they're making. Um, at the same time, the market dynamic, I think, is forcing change. Um, People are aging out.
Hmm.
Your owners of businesses are being approached by people that in the past would never approach them. Like you might
Yep.
sell to your, transfer ownership to your kid,
Hmm.
a friend. You might, the local business community someone might decide to buy your company. All of a sudden today, VCs or sorry, private equity are knocking, or you've got, companies that are merging, taking on new lines. I think there's an awareness that manufacturing is a critical asset.
Hmm.
And I'm not sure I can back this with numbers, but
Hmm.
there's interest in manufacturing, and interest equals money.
Yep.
And money always drives change wherever it goes.
Hmm.
And that is causing people to take steps forward. Now,
Hmm.
whether they're taking them in a cohesive manner, whether it a whole organization has kind of gotten behind the idea that we need to do something. We're going to improve. We're going to, drive a quality initiative. We're going to, predictive monitoring and maintenance
Hmm.
and get ahead of problems that are causing us capacity issues or whatever.
Oh,
Um, I think there's this kind of burning ember that is under most businesses, if
hmm.
nothing other than many of them can transition, and being set up for transition well is something that is on people's minds. Um, I think the trick is trying to figure out, um, the universal problem is getting that alignment.
Yep.
Universal problem is getting agreement from, throughout the organization on what the priority issue is, what's the
Hmm.
primary driver, that there is a need for action, um, or that you're kind of synchronized, because I see a lot of like, hey, what are we doing about AI? Coming from the
Yeah.
executive level,
Mhm.
and people on the floor, engineer, advanced engineering, whatever, they're like, we've been using machine learning and AI forever. And if you would just take a look, you would actually understand that that's already in our systems. But that isn't what we need right now. What we need is better visibility and data interoperability. The AI can come later, but so misaligned. Um, they're both trying to do the same thing, ultimately,
Absolutely.
but it's almost a disconnect in language and
Hmm.
disconnect in sequence of priorities. And so I think the universal problem is getting the organization aligned around the need to move, to the need to
Hmm.
change. The uh, the order, the roadmap that you're going to approach and tackle the different challenges. But those challenges may vary. And I think one of the things that is a little difficult is understanding that it's okay to, the ROI on a given project, it you've put in because this is important for certain
Hmm.
reasons, but it's likely going to compound as it gets practiced, as
Hmm.
more and more people get familiar, as other things like a lot of these change activities have a ripple effect and drive other changes and other opportunities. And the ability to, again, I think a lot of it comes back to focus
Yep.
and staying on a path, but also not being afraid that, hey, we may get, 6 months into this and realize, holy crap, there's all sorts of opportunity over here. And
Hmm.
making sure that you have a change process that allows for you to course correct. So,
Absolutely. Do you think it's a focus because people are being pulled in so many different directions? Do you think it's a messaging, like lots of solutions providers, lots of software platforms, lots of hardware platforms are maybe messaging to the engineers or are messaging to the executives? Vlad and I, it was probably about a year ago, is we had a person or we had a group. I think they approached us both separately, and they're like, "Hey, do you want to go us to go look at your solution?" And their solution was a bunch of additional sensors that were IIoT, and they monitored back to like a home run, and it provided a dashboard, and they were saying it provided some specific metrics that I don't believe is possible to provide by the sensors that they're claiming it does. And when I think Vlad and I both asked separately, is hey, who are your customers, who are your users? And for them it was VP ops, right? Like the VP of ops is going to cut a check and they're going to come in and deploy this, and maybe the VP ops is the only person who looks at this dashboard because they want some of that information. So I feel like for a group like that, they are targeting, they're not getting bogged down in the engineering minutia of the engineers on the site. They're not getting bogged down into the we've got to go touch every single one of your PLCs, every single one of your sensors. Why do you think, with all of the different platforms and opportunities that exist, we're still struggling to connect with the different layers?
yeah, that, this is. this is a line that we could stay on for, all night.
Absolutely.
I mean,
Absolutely.
um, I guess it's, I'll start by saying it's a great time to be a customer, a
Hmm.
producer. Your ability to drive change and dabble in technology and do things that um, to your process and with your people in a way that it, um, it's just so much different today versus even 5 years ago.
Hmm.
Um, uh, at the same time, I would hate to be a customer because
Absolutely. There are
I
too
mean
many opportunities, too many
it's
options.
yeah, and
Mhm.
when I think about like an ideal customer, I love customers that aren't on LinkedIn, because if you're on LinkedIn, the noise is deafening.
Hmm.
The volume of solutions is deafening.
Hmm.
Um, and I wouldn't say that, I want like ignorant or, secluded
Hmm.
customers or, but there's a certain ability to bring them along
Hmm.
if customers aren't spending their day all day, watching LinkedIn, reading about UNS,
Hmm.
you know, MQTT, like it's almost like going back to my entry into consulting, the language is different.
Hmm.
And, you need to understand EBITDA and like, words that didn't make sense from an engineer's perspective coming into this world now. You I have CEOs ask me like, well, should I be using MQTT or OPC? It's like, what the? Why are you talking about that?
Yes.
Like, why do you care? And why is that
Hmm.
in the discussion right now? Um, it is it, it is a confusing time,
Hmm.
and it's a little like at home. Your ability to I can put a Z-Wave thing. I can add a sensor here. I can put some Zigbee switches. I have light
Hmm.
switches. And then you try to, and maybe you got it all put together right. And
Hmm.
then you go on vacation and something happens and, your kid calls you and it's like, well, what do I do? Um, or
Hmm.
worse, you sell your house and you're the
Yeah.
new owner. And now you've got to figure out like, what is all this crap and how do I find it and how do I
Hmm.
connect it and did I remember to transition all the passwords over there? I think
Hmm.
today we have so many options and the ability to solve problems quickly, but to do it in a way that is can be really fragmented. And I think that is a real problem for people. I think the understanding, the you can solve almost everything. Again, back to like
Hmm.
manufacturing software, which is where I've spent a lot of time. Um, there's no reason that you can't solve the problem in a pure play IoT platform,
Hmm.
in something like Ignition, which started as a SCADA platform and now is a little bit of everything, or solve it in a more traditional MES thing that can connect straight down. And theoretically, I can send data direct from sensors to whatever, like the example you gave. Um, and I think that is paralyzing. And it comes back to um, first focusing on the problems that matter and trying to figure out what those problems are. I think that it is helpful to find a Sherpa, a guide, someone who can help
Hmm.
help you understand that this world is kind of crazy, but
Mhm.
at the end of the day, there's really not that many choices. I mean, there's a million choices, but they're all kind of the same.
Hmm.
And and helping you figure out what the roadmap would be, where you start to open the aperture and start to understand and learn more and do more, and but also understand where some of your investments are kind of foundational investments, and just like and deciding on an ERP. There's lots of good ERPs. There's lots of good business systems, but that's kind of a pivotal foundational thing that is going to affect a lot of your systems downstream. It's going to affect a lot of your processes downstream, and it's going to affect your users, your people, the adoption of the technology and the adoption of some of these tools. And I think the important point is, find a guide or a Sherpa, figure out and focus on the problems that really matter to your business. Make some deep and meaningful investments in certain ecosystems, certain like centers of gravity from a technology standpoint. And then also don't be afraid that you can decorate it and try some of these other things out. And maybe, some of those tools that did provide only certain elements, but if they provide those elements well and they integrate with other systems well, and the data is fairly transferable, there's nothing wrong with the fact that I have a Zigbee switch and a Z-Wave thing, and they actually come together, and I can, through Alexa, figure out, just turn the light on, and it just does it. So I don't think you have to be afraid, but I also think that the waters are deep, and it's very, very easy to get misguided, or to spend a lot of money and make a lot of investments in a bunch of random directions and not get the results you're after.
If I can expand on that, Ryan, and I think to like Dave's original question, I think that there's still going to be quite a skills gap as we move forward, right? As we said, there's more excitement. I think there's a lot of companies investing quite heavily in their, US or North American based manufacturing infrastructure, and there's been a lot of announcements publicly made right on that front. And I feel, to your point, there's just not enough people to help guide some of those changes, because whether you want it or not, there's still quite a learning curve, if I was to, I guess, describe it that way, for someone to be able to create a holistic architecture, if you will, right? If you've not experienced that problem, as we've talked about, your earlier background, it's very difficult for that person to come in and consult a manufacturer within that space and how to make some of those decisions. And some of them can be fairly critical, right? The solutions can be similar to each other, but if you pick the right tool for the right opportunity, it's going to be a world of difference if you pick the wrong tool for that specific manufacturer, right? So for me, as I want to say, throw money at this problem, I would still question, are we training enough engineers? Are we incentivizing enough, engineers? And it could be managers as well, it could be technicians, whomever, because every facility I go to, even at the controls layer, right? Like, forget even the data and sort of ERP MES layers, there's not enough people just handling the day to day. There's not enough people being able to solve, those plant floor challenges. And even less so when it comes to extracting data, storing data, synthesizing data, and then making decisions. It is quite a challenge. And I think a pure financial investment is not necessarily going to eliminate all of that, which also is an opportunity for all of us, right? Ultimately, if there's a pressure to get those systems in check, there should be, in theory, more capital to go around for those that do solve those problems, right? And again, I'm curious, maybe if you have some perspectives on, if universities are solving this better, if trade schools are solving this better. I hear a lot of conversations, but it's like I said, every facility I go to has an engineer opening, technicians opening, multiple technicians openings. There's just not enough people to do the implementation work. Even if you were to say, hey, we want to put an ignition, obviously there's third party resources sometimes available, but even they're booked, sometimes months, sometimes years in advance. So it is a challenge.
So I thought of another universal problem. A universal problem is pay. Like, this industry does not pay enough, and that is part of the reason that there is a skills gap. People will go. It's supply and demand, and if there is enough supply of incentive, it will get filled. So the I'm trying to think of a specific, or I think first of all, the resources. This is a great time to have been in industry, and don't forget about the all the gray hairs that are out there. It's a little like COBOL programmers or whatever, like they're still in demand. I think there is a really interesting dynamic right now where you've got the workforce that's aged out, but still in a lot of ways has all the tools and skills, because often things don't change that rapidly in manufacturing. And so I think there is an ability to reach back out to a generation that has transitioned in part or wholly away, and that's something to not forget. I think there is the ecosystem. One thing that is I find quite different today versus when I practiced, earlier in my career, is the willingness to reach beyond the walls of my factory or my enterprise. Just the fact that the three of us are talking, we each bring different skill sets. I think that is an advantage companies have and people have entering into the workforce that in the past they didn't necessarily have. I was an engineer at Goodyear. I can talk to other engineers at Goodyear. Don't you dare talk to Michelin, first of all. But second of all, I would never dream of getting advice from the the plant two doors down or whatever. It's just you didn't. This was my world. I think that has changed, and I think in younger generations, the willingness to be to admit failure or to go on the journey in public. Yeah, back in my day, you wouldn't tell people that you didn't know anything. You locked the door and read as many books as you could and saw and Lord knows you didn't want to have something go wrong and have people see it. I think the willingness to learn in public and uh, and to fail in public allows for a spirit of collaboration that is different in the space. And so when it comes back to, I'm, I can't find talent, and I might be one person with a set of skills and I need access to other skills. I think the ability to reach out and work with the community, work with the ecosystem, learn from others is greater today. At the same time, we do need to train more. We need to encourage more. And I don't think it's as clear as it was, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when, okay, you pick, you're going to be technical, then you pick, I'm going to be, in, industry, and then I'm going to pick an industry. Like, I think almost anyone can come into this space, and there are areas where you really need to be a specialist. You need a depth of knowledge and a depth of understanding that can be helped by being having a great education or going through a particular program. But there's also so many resources these days that I think the biggest thing is just, are you curious? Are you willing to learn? Are you willing to be dedicated? And if you are, and you like to solve problems, you can figure out how to do ignition. You can figure out how to put in a robot. You can figure out, like, again, it might not be the straightest path, but you're the most important thing that I think we need to continue to encourage is be curious, be creative, don't be afraid to fail, and whether or not that's a highly technical program or coming in from other angles, I think that's really important. I think the biggest missing piece comes back to pay. It comes back to, is this a career that you can have and sustain and grow with? I think those are the things that I hope the schools, I hope the people that are crafting educational programs are focused on, because if I can make $185 an hour as a HVAC technician, and hang my own shingle and take a course, and or I can get beaten down as a controls engineer in the automotive industry for $80 an hour. Like, why would I do that? I think that's something that has to be addressed. And a lot of these so-called people problems will start to shift or start to go away. At the same time, I think there are roles in industry that have changed. Material movement, the ability to have a AMR run around the factory and do stuff for you, the ability to do automated conveyance. Like, I think some of there are areas where robotics, where automation are just simply going to continue to replace people, and that will allow people to then go focus on areas that are hopefully more interesting, and hopefully, I won't say value add, because in the end, a formal lean guy might argue with me that moving a package from here to here is waste. But if that thing can't go out the door because of that, then that person is adding value. So I think that just continuing to encourage people to understand that there is huge opportunity, and finding ways from a business standpoint where it does make sense to pay people to stay, to come in, to attract them, and to retain them, and then opening up the aperture in terms of, like, you can learn, you can do some really cool stuff, and it doesn't matter that you went to MIT, or you went to ITT, or you went to cosmetology school or whatever. Like, you can actually do manufacturing, and you can do cool stuff in manufacturing.
Absolutely, I would agree with all of those points. I think you brought up a very good point. At the end of the day, the people issue, you can almost certainly just throw money at it, and it will go solve a lot of those issues. One of the points that I don't think that we necessarily brought up, I know Vlad brought up kind of training on that side. I see there being a larger and larger gap of post college, post engineering school, post tech school opportunities to go get into controls engineering, to go get into any sort of engineering, especially any sort of engineering that they're not trying to work you 80 or 100 hours a week every week for, I don't know, $50,000 a year in a high cost of living place, right? I think there are those opportunities. I don't think that there is, I think that for a large extent, while we've seen lots of large manufacturing, most manufacturing organizations lean out and get rid of the internal engineering department, the department that knew all of their processes. We've seen lots of groups get rid of the junior engineering positions. And so I think it's it's an easier path to go solve some of that, of go bring back some of these junior engineering positions. More often than not, I see groups who have a wish list a mile and a half long of, I want this engineer. This engineer has to, spend 5 years working on this specific ERP. They have to be able to program 100% of my PLCs. And in fact, that's the third job they're going to do. They're going to go recode all of the PLCs in our entire facility. We need plus 20% production. And then while they're doing that, they also need to go through the process of knowing every bit of our HMI SCADA MES software and all of these other things, right? Like, I see more of this unicorn wish list that, what, 5 people are going to be able to have, as opposed to what would be really valuable is going and bringing in 3 junior engineers for this and spend the same 6 months teaching them the process as we're going to have to go teach this guy, and then go pay them approximately the same as this unicorn, and then we'll go have 5 years, 7 years of runway, ideally with a bunch of fun, cool projects within our facility.
Yeah, I have seen and again, this is just one guy's view from the customers and people that I've talked to, but it was horrible, like watching the industry gut their advanced engineering groups, gut their, like I've seen factories with no engineer, no technical
Hmm.
talent. That just baffles me. Like when, back at Goodyear, we had two engineer, maybe 6 or 8 engineers on the floor at all times,
Hmm.
plus the supporting, you had technicians, you had, I just can't understand how you would run an operation without that kind of talent. And yet we were seeing it happen all over the place. And,
Hmm.
you were outsourcing that knowledge to either your equipment vendors or your supply base. And but fundamentally, they're carrying with them the process knowledge too. Like it's not just the technical, that I understand how the PLC works or I understand, like they deeply understand what it takes to make that product, and you're letting them go. I've seen recently a shift towards bringing a lot of that back internal,
Hmm.
and companies are making the investment, larger companies in particular, of recreating and re-emphasizing the importance of an advanced manufacturing engineering group.
Mhm.
Um, Interestingly, I'm seeing smaller companies uh, making an investment in some of those young engineers
Yep.
that you're talking about, and uh, in typically they might have just hired or kept a guy that might have been an expert and kind of grown up from the floor, and they've dubbed them maintenance and engineering manager or whatever. um, Not that there was anything wrong and that that person didn't actually know his stuff, but I've seen a lot more investment and willingness to bring in someone smart. And because there is that list of needs, like it can be a lot of fun. Like, I mean, there is never a dull moment in manufacturing. If there is, you know, you probably need to go talk to someone and figure out what, like, or you're going to get pulled away and pulled to a different place pretty quickly. Um, and I've seen an investment in a bunch of our customers in some of that new generation of talent, or upskilling or giving opportunities to more seasoned talent that
Hmm.
might be different and might be more along the lines of what a traditional engineer would do, which I think is really cool. And uh, it's also a little bit interesting as a service provider because in the past, folks like me or us, there's no end of opportunity. No one has any talent,
Mhm.
and no one has people in their places anymore. Um, I think that has shifted the role of experts like us
Hmm.
to be more coaches, guides, Sherpas, to help enable this new infusion of talent, um, and as connectors into ecosystems and into knowledge pools that might be out of reach.
Hmm.
Uh,
Mhm.
I feel that that is more of a need versus just, hey, I need someone to bang on some keys and get some technology done. Um, what I'm not sure I've quite figured out yet is how to get paid doing that.
Yep. That is a good question. That
Like
is a
how,
good
Mhm.
question.
I know a person, and just by connecting you, I'm going to save you $100,000. And do you charge $500 for that? Do you charge anything for that? I'm not sure
Hmm.
our ecosystem has figured that out yet. But I think we're all learning. And
Hmm.
uh, I hear a lot also about like the AI, and
Hmm.
I feel the great pause that AI has triggered.
Hmm.
Um, Should I hire, or am I going to no longer need to hire because I'm going to have AI?
Mm.
um, I I think that there has been a there's a lot of thinking that's going on around AI, and um, I I think that will also enable a, a whole new pattern to emerge
Hmm.
where a person with these tools can solve problems in ways that are hyper accelerated. I used to have books, then I had YouTube, and that was great. Like I could
Hmm.
find anything and solve anything with YouTube. Well, now I can have an AI find solutions for me. And I think there is a that is going to change business models, and it's going to change organizations, and
Hmm.
it's going to change where you invest and the need for different types of skills. And I'm not sure that's anyone's figured that out. We're
I
in the middle of a really fundamentally transformative time, and maybe one advantage we have in manufacturing is things tend to just move slower. You
yeah.
know,
I, I
technology comes in with the iron. It comes in when you buy a piece of equipment, and it
Mhm,
tends not to change. And
mhm.
so, um, you know, I think we have a chance to really affect change in a thoughtful way, where that may not be an option in some other industries.
If I can go bring that thought of AI back to our initial thought, I think at the end of the day, there are lots of manufacturing organizations who are interested in AI, but I think the vast majority of those manufacturing organizations that could get the most out of AI have done none of the basic groundwork to
Oh,
have any sort of data to be able to go leverage those tools. So I think that there is still very much industry 3, industry 4 tooling and solutions that need to occur before we talk about any sort of
oh yeah.
AI. I do see that as a potential driver for some of this. Back to the beginning of the conversation, how can we go through the process of solving these problems? I certainly see the day where my VP of Ops or my CFO can go ask ChatGPT or go ask one of our co-pilots or one of these other tools, what is this EBITDA? Why was I down? What are my top X reasons? And instead of having 10,000 pages of reporting that no one wants to go through and control find to find some of those solutions, a software is going to go tell us this reason, and hopefully it'll be correct. And for that, I think that is a very exciting time. Man, there's a lot of work to do for almost every single one of the organizations that we've been talking about today
Yeah.
to get to that point.
I don't, I really don't see a lot of AI on the shop floor.
Yep.
Or if it is, it's, more traditional machine learning around vision and
Yeah.
inspection and,
Hmm.
predictive maintenance, stuff like that,
Hmm.
that, frankly is not new. Um,
Yes.
I think AI right now enables people.
Hmm.
It enables you to learn faster. It enables
Yes.
you to solve problems in ways that you couldn't solve before. I think
Hmm.
that's where AI is having the most impact in manufacturing. Is it's allowing for greater access to knowledge. It's allowing for the ability to collaborate in unique ways. Um, it's it's making available and accessible information that may have been harder to get in the past. And it's, even things like I'm building a project plan. Can you build me a project plan that, to deploy a system? Well, I can ask an AI to do that, and it's actually not going to give you that bad of a solution. like, um, but I see that as the primary impact so far. Now, certainly there's organizations that are making, fundamental use of it in ways that is not is different than the vast majority. But I I think it's pretty cool that it's enabling people first and isn't just making the problem go away on its own. That maybe in a couple of years we'll get to that point. But
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, I was going to say, Vlad, any last thoughts or comments before we ask Ryan our final questions?
Yeah, I would say, I had an interesting conversation around AI with a VP of engineering outside of manufacturing, more on they make sort of a hardware and software solution, so it's more IT based. And ultimately, he brought up an interesting point, which is, combines what you're saying, Ryan, that it enables people on getting, I guess, like better at their job. But ultimately, what he has seen is that if you're a senior or like lead engineer, if you have the industry knowledge, then you get accelerated, right? But if you are a junior, right, if you're brand new to the industry, you almost make the mistake of leveraging AI to the point that you assume that it's right. And so then those people are actually being slowed down in their development times, which becomes really problematic because then the seniors are required to go and fix those issues, right? So I think this brings back, I guess, the initial conversation that we had, which is you cannot skip that almost
Hmm.
requirement of having some industry plant floor experience to know when this is not being accurate enough, and then assuming, essentially training yourself the bad habits that come along with the current, at least, iteration of AI. And that's, as far as I read, so I actually read a couple of articles since then, it has been the consensus for a lot of companies, right? There's been this huge spike of first firing a lot of engineers because we anticipated, I think it was a
Hmm.
40% increase in productivity, then
Yeah.
rehiring a bunch of engineers because we've seen that it's not necessarily been that way. And now the more accepted consensus is that if you have industry experience, it's helping you, be more performant at your job. And if you have very little experience, which is maybe also why our industry, and I guess just in the engineering industry in general, is hesitant to hire people with very little experience, but it will sort of require a mind shift, I want to say, in terms of how you approach some of these tools. Does that make sense? And
Y-
Yeah.
what both of you are
Yeah.
seeing? Okay.
And I think it kind of goes back to just good practices. I
Hmm.
mean, technology continues to change. And in the end, like as an engineer, when was I at my most effective? It was when I went out, I listened to the operator, and I made that operator's life better in some way. And you're not going to, you can read a book all day long and it can tell you a bunch of stuff, but it's so much more tangible. You're going to learn so much more. Uh, it's going to be more meaningful, and just the exchange of information that happens at that level. Like if you're if you're trusting that an AI is going to do that for you,
Hmm.
yeah, I'm not sure why. Like I think the problem is that you yeah you made the
Right.
mistake of thinking that technology was just going to remove that
Hmm.
issue. Um, Go out, talk to people, understand what they're going through, understand what their pains are, and then use the AI to help you with whatever solution you might be working on. But it's also validate it with that person,
Hmm.
validate it with that. Like, does this make sense? It,
Mhm.
you know, I mean, yes, there are engineers and technical people and whoever that know it all. Um, I as an engineer, never felt like I knew enough of anything. Like my answer was always, does this actually make a difference for you? And if it did, I won. If it didn't, I need to go back and think more.
Hmm.
so,
Yeah.
so I think those best practices are, they're kind of, um, they're the same, and you just got to be, reasonable with the way you're applying technology. If you're dumb enough to think an AI is going to solve everything, well, I'm not sure I would want to work for people like that anyway. So, because they probably don't care
Absolutely.
about me.
Ryan, this has been a super fun conversation. I am happy to go have you back on. We do want to make sure to get to ask you all of the questions we get to ask at the end of every week, and our longtime listeners will know the first one is one of my most favorite. It's a predict the future question. So I feel like we've been touching on that a little bit towards the end of this conversation, but we want
Mhm.
to go ask you, Ryan, what do you predict the future of manufacturing looks like in the next 3 to 5 years?
I think it's just accelerate. Like it's
Hmm.
going to continue to evolve. It's going to continue to change. It's going to be a a place of opportunity,
Oh,
and it would be, you'd be foolish not to consider it. I think, just like you're hearing more and more about agents and agentic AI, I think the human side of that is, as this transition occurs in, ownership of businesses, aging out of populations, transitioning of skill sets, I think that the ability for an individual to reach out and help not only the business that they're in, but to be an agent and potentially be more and more independent. And the gig economy and all of that, I think that's going to keep creeping into manufacturing more and more. I would say AI, last year I wasn't even paying attention to it. It was just a little like digital transformation. Like, what's that mean? I have yet to have a customer ask me, "Can you please digitally transform me?" Like, it just doesn't happen. Like, people
mm.
have problems and they want that problem fixed, and digital transformation is not a problem that people have. Um, I think AI was a bit like that. It was just a buzzword. Today, I think it's it's something you have to pay attention to, and thinking through how it's going to change your business, how it's going to change your business model, and and there is no script for what we're going through right now. I think that is something that the best defense against all of that change is collaboration, is learning, and just continuing to stay out there and be willing to learn, and not thinking that any answer is infallible.
If I can make a
Absolutely.
comment really briefly to Ryan's comment and I guess Dave's question, I think it would be interesting, Ryan, as you said, to see more, not necessarily just successes, but also failures in how, AI is applied and maybe is trialed in manufacturing. Because I know there's certainly companies, again, maybe on the larger side, like you've mentioned a couple of names that are R&Ding some projects, right? But I feel like there's not enough publications to understand how have they succeeded and or failed. And I think there is I would say, an appetite for that type of content, at least from my side, right? I see a lot
Mhm.
of OEMs publicize the types of solutions they have built, but I don't see a lot of end users necessarily talking about what has or hasn't worked. And again, from the software industry, can draw certain conclusions of how it's going to play out. But I spent a lot of time to what Dave had mentioned is, in the trenches, figuring out how we can actually get access to that data and just fixing obsolescence problems instead of spending a lot of my time on AI. So I'm
Yep.
very curious, right? I'm interested in reading about it, but I just I don't have enough time to go in that direction as well. So I'd be very interested in what people are saying and are able to discuss outside of obviously non-disclosure agreements that they may have on that side. So
Yeah.
Absolutely. That is a good hope. I think we'd all love that, Vlad. I think that that is a change that I would love to see, but it is certainly not a guess of a future prediction that I'm going to make at any point soon. Ryan, we love to ask for some career advice. I feel like you gave a lot of really interesting background and career advice and some of the
mhm.
changes that you had made. But I want to go ask for someone who is earlier, perhaps mid-career, with your vast experience on the technical and consulting and then back and forth sides. What's the best one piece, or maybe what's the best couple of pieces of career advice you have to go share?
I think um, staying curious,
Hmm.
uh, really deeply understanding the product or the process, and is super important. Like,
Hmm.
it's easy as a technologist to get wrapped up in the technology, or as a an HR person to get wrapped up in the human side or whatever. But
Hmm.
in the end, you are making a thing that you are going to sell, and
Hmm.
understanding that thing and what makes it work, and what are the attributes that make it interesting for a consumer to buy, and really deeply understanding the process, I think is super important and very easy. Like you know, I can say tires were not that interesting to me when I was
Mhm.
making tires. And I regret not spending more time trying to understand that process, because ultimately that knowledge base that you gain throughout
Mhm.
wherever you are in your career, you're going to amplify it. You're going to learn from it. You're going to grow from it, and you're going to be able to find patterns that it will benefit you. So I think staying curious, deeply understanding the process and the product that you're making,
Mhm.
um, not being afraid to learn, and go talk to the front line, hear what the
Mhm.
front line is saying, even if you're back in the office or you're on the design side or whatever. Get out there and learn from the people that are actually making the product. And I think that in the end, that's the secret weapon, because you can take that right back and go stand in the hallways of Deloitte, and if I can tell you what matters to that operator,
Mhm.
I'm different. I'm Anyone can go get an MBA. That is unique knowledge that no one can take away from you.
Absolutely. No, I would agree. Understanding the process is, I feel, only becoming more and more valuable, and will only become more and more valuable as
Mhm.
we move on. Ryan, we love to ask for some book recommendations, and I know you've got a slightly different, I suppose, book and content recommendation. So without further ado, I'm going to let you go ahead and give it to us, please.
Well, the I would say my book recommendation is the starter core package of Dungeons and Dragons. So
Hmm.
the player's handbook, the DM's guide, the monster manual. Um, I'm obviously a nerd, and I've been playing for a while. And today I did a post where I was um, I, I kind of wanted to blend the worlds that I play in, the manufacturing world and all the adventures that we go on in manufacturing. Feels a little bit like some of these uh, random adventures that we went on in Dungeons and Dragons. But I actually think the creativity that that game has inspired, and um, seeing problems, being able to role play different situations, working through different dynamics of people. I, there's very little pieces of literature that I could say have had that kind of an influence or that kind of an impact on so many people. And if you haven't played D&D, it's not for everyone, but um, I happen to rank that one right up there with you know the Odyssey, and you know all those other business books, the 1 Minute Manager and whatever, that have fundamentally made a difference. So I'd say the D&D rule books.
Okay. That is high praise for the D&D rule books. Higher praise than anyone has definitely given on Manufacturing Hub. Perhaps higher praise than anyone has ever given to the D&D rule books. And so we absolutely appreciate that. It's going to be interesting to listen to Vlad go listen to the rule books, and see what he comes back with. So thank you so much for that. Ryan, last question for you is how can our listeners help? Who should reach out? Kind of your opportunity to talk about Axiom and what you're doing. If you guys are looking to hire, if you guys are looking for customers, very much kind of your open platform to ask our listeners.
I would say the biggest thing is just keep sharing, keep collaborating. You know, do good. Like, in the end, it comes back to you. And I think that the more we can share experiences and not be as fearful about, this is my business, this is my customer, this is my process. Um, Collaborating is the only way we're going to win going forward. Whether it's competing uh, for resources, whether it's
Mhm.
competing against other countries and whatever else, whether it's competing against AI and Skynet when it gets here or whatever. Like,
Mhm.
I think human collaboration is our secret weapon, and we need to do that as much as possible and lift each other up. From a opportunity standpoint, like
Mhm.
we have a customer that we're working with that brought us in, and it was so fundamentally different from so many other experiences. We had the CEO sit with us all day long, his
Mhm.
whole leadership sit with us all day long, touring the plant, talking through things, his board there. They they want change, and they are willing to invest in change, and they are approaching change in the right way, which is it's a team sport and everyone
Mhm.
participates. And we're going to debate needs and issues and priorities, but doing it out in public like that, I haven't seen that happen that frequently. And
Mhm.
I would say that's the right model. That's, quote, the ideal customer. And if you know people like that, we want to help them. And we're fortunate enough at this point in our career where we get to only work with the customers that we want to work with. We don't have to work with crappy customers anymore. And if you know those people, I would love to talk with them and see if I can help, or see if I can bring in some of the other talent that is within the ecosystem. And we are good partners as far as we're willing to share. And I think that, whether it's a customer, whether it's smart people, whether it's, some of the technology products that are out there, yeah, I can't guarantee you that I'm going to walk you into 27 different opportunities tomorrow. But, I think that in general, Axiom is a team of rock stars, and backed by a whole ecosystem of rock stars. And the more we talk, the more we share, the more we collaborate, the more we all win. So,
Absolutely, Ryan. I think that was fantastic. I will say, if anyone's listening who wants to reach out to Ryan, and I feel like most of you should, we'll make sure to have all of Ryan's contact information on the show notes. If you guys are watching on LinkedIn, which is where most of you guys find us, Ryan is tagged in the post, as well as tagged as a speaker, as we do with all of our episodes. If you guys have made it this far, I guess I should say first, thank you so much for hanging out with us once again, Ryan. I looked earlier. You were up. You and Becca, when coming in talking about Energy Insights, were episode 104. So we'll have to attempt to do it again before we hit episode 300 and something. We will definitely be seeing you guys at Automate and several of the other shows coming up in the near future. And so, if you guys are Manufacturing Hub listeners, stay tuned to see more of the conversations that we're having with Ryan and other fun people like Ryan. If you guys have made it this far, you're absolutely awesome. Please, again, make sure that you're following Ryan. Make sure you're following Manufacturing Hub, as well as Vlad and myself. If you guys have made it this far on YouTube or on podcast format, please make sure to hit a subscribe button, hit the follow along button, rate us 5 stars in all of those awesome places that you can rate us. When I tell people to do that, and then Vlad goes and publishes the episodes, people go and subscribe and more people listen, which is pretty freaking awesome. Until next week, we'll see everyone.